Hey Research Stat 1 class, this is Stephanie, and I'm coming at you with your video for Chapter 2. This chapter talks a lot about different kinds of articles and sources that you find available for studying psychology, and not just psychology, right, but any kind of science. And so the idea in this chapter is to kind of prepare you a little bit to start to read research articles, to start to understand them. And then I have the additional goal of trying to help you prepare to start writing something that looks like a research article, because when you get to Research Stat 2, you're going to use some of what you're learning in this chapter to actually write a research proposal, a full research proposal. So this chapter is actually pretty important. The reality is that really it's a well-written chapter for you. There's not a whole lot to really add to it. It's kind of one of those chapters where you're going to read, again, remember this is a process class, so you're going to read the information and then you're going to go apply it. So this week, you've been completing the library assignment. So you've been watching the modules on avoiding plagiarism, conducting research, and the APA formatting. Remember that we use APA 7 for this class. So you may have learned APA 6 for the last however many years you've been in school, right? Because APA 7 just came out last October. But the APA has shifted to the APA 7th edition. The biggest difference between the two really for you guys as students is going to be that title page or that cover page. So it's totally different now, right? There's no running head text. You've got a space where you include your department. Remember that we are in the Department of Life Sciences, in the College of Arts and Sciences. And so, make sure you know, it's always shocking to me how many students don't even have a clue like what department they're in. They put Department of Psychology. There's no Department of Psychology at A&M. So you really have to know your information, and those are things you should know. You should know that information. Another big issue that students often have is that they put that they go to Texas A&M and they don't put at San Antonio, and that's super misleading, right? It makes it sound like you go to College Station, which you certainly don't. You go to Texas A&M University at San Antonio. Have some pride in that, right? And it's your job to be clear about those things, because university affiliation does matter. It makes a difference. So make sure that you're really doing your best on the APA cover page. Hopefully you utilized your APA manual to complete that assignment. It's actually due today, which is why this is coming out. I wanted to see if you guys were utilizing what you learned in the modules that you watched, and then also that you were utilizing your APA manual to complete that work. So if you have any little mistakes there, make sure you go correct them so that you don't make those same mistakes, right, in the next set of assignments. So the APA manual is important for us, and certainly in Chapter 2 it talks about some of those ideas of like formatting and things like that. We're going to start off really quickly talking about research and the different kinds of sources that you might have. So the book talks about primary research versus secondary research. So primary research is kind of articles, usually journal articles, where you've got original research that is being written about. So the authors conducted the research and then they are publishing that research. So often when we see primary research, we're going to see it in journals. In fact, that's the most common place that we're going to find primary research. Secondary research then is a little bit different, and it can look at a bunch of different ways actually in psychology journals. So you might see secondary research in something like a literature review. You might see it in something like a meta-analysis. Those are two really common ways that we share information. And what we're really doing when we use like a review article is we're saying, look, this is all the research that I can find that is defined in the way I'm wanting it to be defined, and that's allowing us to answer the question that I want answered. So I put all of that into a review article, and I'm reviewing all of other people's research that is pertinent to the question at hand. And meta-analysis is a little bit different than that. And meta-analysis takes other people's research and it kind of utilizes some statistical techniques to reanalyze it as if you had done a bigger study. So if I have 10 studies that all used 100 participants, I would now have a reanalysis of that, which might look more like it was a study that investigated 1,000 people. So a meta-analysis is really actually kind of complicated and a little bit difficult to conduct, because you have to make sure that the operational definitions are all aligned, that the studies are relatively similar, so you're not comparing apples to oranges in it. So anyway, you'll talk about meta-analyses later in your career, but they are considered a secondary source. All right. So the next question to ask is, do you have a scholarly source, or do you have a more popular sort of source? So a scholarly source is going to be something like a peer-reviewed journal. I know when I was you guys, I made what I consider to be a really common classic psychology student mistake. You're interested in psychology, you go to Barnes & Noble and they have Psychology Today, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is awesome, right? I actually had a subscription to Psychology Today for 3 years before I realized that it was not actually a scholarly source. And it was actually my research stat class that helped me I guess it was about 2 years. That I had it before I actually realized, okay, like this is not a scholarly journal. It's really a magazine. That's why they sell it in Barnes & Noble. They don't sell any journals at Barnes & Noble. So a scholarly work is the most important type of source that we have in science, not just in psychology, but in any science. It is the author's original work. They are disseminating the findings of their research for us. And oftentimes that person is considered to be an expert in their field. Even if they're not considered to be an expert in their field, one of the reasons why peer-reviewed research is so important is that when we talk about peer review, those peers are experts. So when we say that it is peer-reviewed, it's not just that any old schmuck can go look at the work. It's the idea that people who are experts in this field have reviewed this work and find it to be high quality and worthy of being published. Today, we have a lot of really kind of interesting stuff going on with what we call open access journals. And that is especially true. Like I'm following a bunch of open access journals with the COVID stuff because I find it to be fascinating just from a scientific point of view. And so, there's a ton of research out there. If we were waiting for that research to be published in a peer-reviewed journal, we probably would just now, right, about 6 months into this pandemic, we would just now be having articles trickle in, because the peer review process takes time, then that information has to be published. So the open access opportunities in a fast-moving situation like the COVID situation have actually proven to be invaluable and certainly important. That said, there are a number of studies that have been published in an open access way without peer review that later, when they undergo peer review, have been revoked by the journals. And that's been interesting to watch too, because what it means is that the peer review process works. So just because something can get published on an open access site does not mean that it's good quality work. And that peer review process then is important in weeding out methodological flaws, statistical issues. Some of these have not used appropriate statistical analyses. There's actually some really interesting stuff. Most of the reasons that they're getting pulled is methodological, but it's been really fascinating to watch. So we want to be careful when we're looking at sources. Even if they look like they're journal sources, if they're open access, we want to be really careful with that, because the reality is that some open access journals actually will publish just about anything as long as you pay for it to be published. And there are authors out there who are paying for their work to be published by these journals. And that's a real issue. So just be aware of that. Ideally, if you're going to use a journal article, it will be from a peer-reviewed journal. And one of the things that I highly recommend, in the research workshop that you watched for the library assignment, it shows you how to use keywords and things like that, and additional limiters. And one of the things that I recommend, if you're in PsycInfo, you can limit your results to peer-reviewed journals. Limit it to peer-reviewed journals. That's going to help you weed out some of those more predatory open access journals. Popular works are things like Psychology Today, right? Things that you see on the news, things that you read in the, well, I guess no one has newspapers, right? Only a couple of us weirdos still get the paper, but things that you see in newspapers or even, you know, on websites. Those are all popular articles. And I'll say this, I don't believe that they're useless. I know some professors say, oh, don't use any of that stuff. I think it's a great place to start getting ideas. But if you're reading about someone's research in a popular format, like in a magazine, it tells you who did the research. Go find the actual research then. Use that primary source. Use that scholarly source when you're going to be writing about something academically. Okay? All right. So let's skip a little bit, and we are going to talk about some other places that you might find opportunities to learn about the science of psychology. So the one that I want to focus on are conferences and papers and posters. Your book talks about other things as well, but I want to specifically talk about conferences because at A&M San Antonio, we send a lot of students to something called the Southwestern Psychological Association, or SWAPA is what you'll hear us call it for short, every year. We are incredibly lucky. We're a relatively small department. We have a good amount of faculty, and our faculty are truly interested in allowing you as students to become researchers. And so there are a ton of research opportunities in the labs of our tenure track faculty members. So as you get into research too, and maybe you're finding, ooh, I actually really like this research thing, there are plenty of opportunities for you to work with our tenured and tenure track professors. And I hope you'll take advantage of those. I have to tell you, you know, coming from a big school at UTSA, there were not that many opportunities. They have a lot of adjunct faculty, they have a lot of lecturers, and the tenured and tenure track faculty members mostly work with grad students. And so the idea that undergrads can take advantage and participate in research opportunities was pretty rare. We are incredibly lucky at A&M that it's not a rare thing. In fact, it's a really common thing. So go as undergrads, get some of that good research experience under your belt as you continue on with your career. And one of the things that comes from that then is the opportunity to present the work that you've done at SWAPA. And so we've actually had a couple of students get grants from SWAPA to help them pay for some of their research. We've had students do actual talks at SWAPA, but we have a lot of students who do poster projects. Poster projects are fantastic. They're a great way to quickly disseminate information. In fact, it can be a lot quicker to do a poster project rather than go through the peer review process and publish it. And I don't mean like it's quicker, so go do that, but if you have some important information, going and doing a conference, whether it's a talk or whether it's a poster, is a great way to get that information out quickly. That's what I really mean. And it's a way to get immediate peer review on it as well. People look at those posters with critical eyes, and so they're making suggestions to you. They're talking to you. It can be a great way to meet people, like to network for graduate school. And so conferences are a really great thing. Obviously, in the time of COVID, we're not actually experiencing a whole lot of in-person conferences. Dr. Weatherford and Dr. Blake and I believe Dr. Baldessari are all, I'm sorry, I said Dr. Blake, I meant Dr. Erickson and Dr. Baldessari are all part of something called the Armadillo Conference. And they have actually worked in conjunction with a couple of other people who do the Armadillo Conference to put it as a virtual conference this semester. And so that's next month at the beginning of October. And I'm going to give you guys the information so that you can, if you want to see what a conference looks like, even a virtual conference, you can take part in that. And there's going to be poster sessions and things like that. So you can kind of see what that looks like. What does it look like when people give that information in a way different than just an article? Because there are lots of different ways, as the book talks about, to kind of disseminate that information. Okay, so you should have learned in the research workshop how to conduct research, how to kind of use the databases. I recommend 2 databases for you. The first is PsycInfo, which I know is kind of what they talk about in the research module, but I also love Web of Science. So I personally use both of those quite often. So if you're looking for something that's maybe a little more medical in a little more medical in scope, or you it's a little more sciencey, maybe a little more kind of biological based, Web of Science can be a great reference for you. When you're doing these searches, one of the things you need to keep in mind is what keywords you're using. I think that the biggest reason that students have difficulty finding research that they want to use is that they don't use the right keywords. So they're not finding the information. I was just talking to a student yesterday, actually. I was on campus with our book, had a couple of you who still are waiting on the book for whatever reason, and I was talking to a student about a book from another class, and she started telling me about her Research 3. She actually had me for Research 1, and she was talking about her Research 3 class, and she's got to get something to the IRB by next week, and we were talking about her interest, and so I was asking her about it, and she gave me her keywords, and I was like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about that? And she's like, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of looking with those other words. When you're doing a keyword search, don't get in a rut, right? You might have something you're interested. They're actually going to study some stuff related to COVID, but there's not a lot of COVID research right now. So think about something like catastrophic disease or catastrophic illness. It doesn't necessarily have to be COVID for it to be relevant, right? It could be any kind of catastrophic illness. And so when I started talking about that, and we even talked about, like, have you thought about looking at some of the cancer research? She hadn't thought of those things because she was kind of a little bit television, and that's okay. That's totally normal. But one of the things that you start to learn, right, as you start to grow as a researcher, are those additional keywords, not getting boxed in, so that you have really a beautiful breadth of knowledge when you're looking at the literature review for your study. The opposite thing can sometimes happen, though, right? So maybe sometimes you're having trouble finding stuff and you need to expand your ideas and your keywords. But also sometimes, like, you type in a word, like let's say depression, and you get 4 million hits. So narrowing your search can be incredibly important too. And there are different operators that you can do, that you can employ during your search. So things like and. So, okay, you're not just interested in depression. Let's say that you're interested in depression in women specifically. So you're looking for depression and you're looking for women, right? So when you have the and operator, it's going to force the system to only give you studies where it has this and this. Okay. Let's say, though, that you use the or operator. So the and operator narrows your search because it has to have this thing and this other thing. So you're going to find fewer studies. But let's say that you're interested in depression and selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, right? Or SSRIs. So there's 2 ways to say that thing. And if you type in depression and selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, you're only going to find studies where they use that terminology. And that's fine. But some other studies might also say SSRIs. And so one of the things that you need to do is you need to do depression and then in that box where you've put the and, you want to put SSRI or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. That's going to allow you to find both of those terms with depression. So or expands the search because it could be this or it could be that. So you're going to find both. So it's a bigger search. and narrows your search. And you can use both of them at the same time, like depression and SSRI or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So those kinds of tricks are really important. And if you are, so this first time I'm not going to help you do your search. You are on your own. I want to see that you can employ the tactics that you learned about in the workshop. After this, so I want to see how you do. After this, though, any of the searches that you need to do, I'm happy to help you with. I hope that you'll ask me for help. I'm there for you. All right, so I want you to always use databases in this class, always. We will never have a time where I'm like, don't use the library databases. But the book talks about some more popular ways to search, like Google and Google Scholar. I'll tell you that that's not appropriate for a Research 1 class, in my opinion, so we don't utilize those. But read it, certainly. There are some older articles available on Google Scholar, and that's great, but I want you to always be using our library databases, okay? All right. So the last thing we need to talk about is kind of reading the articles and evaluating them. So I have on in our readings folder, I have a reading that I want you to take a look at in conjunction with this chapter. So hopefully you've already read through the chapter. You're supposed to do that already this week. And now I want you to read the article by Daryl Bem that's called Writing the Empirical Article. I am a huge believer that if you can understand how to write an article, you can understand how to read an article. So the book tells you like what a title should consist of, what an abstract should look like, what an introduction should be, and that's all important. But what Bem does, and actually you can tell that the book is utilizing some of those recommendations that Bem made way back in the 1970s. Bem is going, the article that I have for you is updated, I want to say in 2002, maybe 2005. And I'm sure both of those dates will be wrong when you look at it. It's the early 2000s that it was updated. But it gives you not just the, like, this is what an abstract looks like, this is what an intro looks like, but it gives you the why. So that you can understand, why do we write it like that? Why do we start the introduction off in really broad terms and then kind of bring it in until at the very end of the introduction, we have your specific hypotheses for your study. That kind of, not just this is what it should be, but why is it like that? And that's going to help you not just write empirical articles, but it's absolutely going to help you be able to read them as well. So make sure that you really pay attention to that part of the chapter. It's going to help you read the articles. You definitely are going to be reading articles this semester and presenting information on them. So the other thing that I want to show you, this is one of the slides that I have for you, and it's in the book. I think this is so important, this idea of what does a article sort of look like? What is the format that it follows? So as we finish up this chapter, then we're going to be using a couple of different ideas from chapter 1 and chapter 2 as we scooch into chapter 3. Because in chapter 3, and you're going to notice that I add a lot of information to chapter 3, like a ton. It has, I think, like a paragraph about variables. I have an entire lecture that we're going to do on that. It's about 45 minutes, because you cannot study something scientifically if you do not understand operational definitions, independent variables, dependent variables. So we're going to do all that at the front of next week. That video will post on Tuesday, and then we've got a video that'll post Thursday, and then another one for Friday, taking you through chapter 3, all the additions that I'm going to make, because that chapter is an important chapter. It's an important chapter for the science of psychology, and but again, this is kind of a social psych book, so it's a little less sciencey. We got to get the science into it, right? So the last thing I want to say is this. The chapter in the book kind of ends with the APA style citations. Those haven't really changed. We have additional guidance the APA now about kind of how to cite websites and stuff. I tested you on that actually in the library assignment, and so I hope that you guys utilized your APA manuals and your critical thinking skills to come up with a solution for the Student Rights and Responsibilities website. And the last thing I want to say is this: I hope you really paid attention to and read the things that the Student Rights and Responsibilities website had to say about plagiarism and cheating, because I really do report plagiarism. I really do report cheating. They are important things to avoid, even if it's tempting, and it would be a shame for anyone to throw away their academic career because they were worried about a single test or because they were worried about a single paper and didn't do those things correctly. So if you read through the Student Rights and Responsibilities like you should have to be able to complete this assignment, then you should have a really good understanding of what plagiarism is, whether it's intentional or not, it's reportable, right? And what cheating is. And so if you have any questions about any of that, please let me know. Let me address those now before you have any papers due where you could be reported for plagiarism, and before you have any exams where you could be reported for cheating, right? And you can cheat on assignments also, right? So that's not unique to exams, but get any clarity you need now before we have any problems later. Okay, you guys have a fantastic weekend. Like I said, the next video is going to post for you on Tuesday about variables. All right, bye-bye.